then in use, 20 quarts.
Say, is the last part of it? What did you say?
I say the standard dry measure then in use equaled 20 quarts.
Wow.
I thought to myself when I read that before that 20 quarts of a thin,
Wow.
flaky, dry substance off the sand must have taken hours
Yes.
to collect. Now, what stands out of that?
There's a lot.
There's a lot there.
Well, I think for me, I'm sorry, Georgia.
Nope, I wasn't saying anything.
Oh, okay, okay. I think if I had to just in general say that, directions were given and when directions were followed, there was a positive outcome. And when directions weren't followed, there was a negative outcome. So it's a lot of words
Mm-hmm.
to boil down, but that's kind of.
That's one way to summarize this entire chapter.
Mhm.
I thought it struck me it was how the people all complained in the beginning to Moses and all that, we could have stayed there and fed well and all with all their complaints. And then Jesus comes back and says, well, I hear all their complaints and this is what we're going to do. And then he started complaining about them not following the directions. So it's like we go from one direction to the other direction.
Mhm.
And then what stands out to me is that they saw the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. I wonder if that's the first time that Lord came with this glory.
Mm.
That, that would have been amazing. See this glory.
So was resting on the Sabbath, I mean, of course, it's in the creation story, but was it part of their ritual and routine?
Well, the interesting thing is that the Ten Commandments come 4 chapters later.
Hmm.
So, this is it's an interesting, question as to
Which came
which came
first, the
first.
chicken or
Yeah,
the egg?
yeah.
Yeah. This could be evidence for the Ten Commandments, or it could be
That's what I was thinking. It was
because
like
of the ten,
Yeah,
we don't
yeah.
really know.
Hmm,
the way he explains, he says, we're doing this and I give you these so that I can see if these people are worthy of following my
hmm.
instruction. So, you know, there was problems to begin with, but at the end they said they did this for 40 years.
Yeah.
So I guess after 40 years he must have trained them well enough to say, all right, after 40 years, all right, you people finally got it down. We can move on from here. And I just that struck me as funny. It was like, 40 years in the desert.
But they were provided for,
Mm-hmm.
like that consistency of
Yep.
being provided
Yep.
for is shows through here.
One thing that strikes me is when, it almost sounds like, well, God's setting this up as a test. Is that what this is?
Yeah.
Mhm.
But what I hear though is it's a test of, do these people trust me?
Mhm.
Because
Yeah.
when they break away, it's like, well, you said there'd be more tomorrow, but I'm going to hoard some just in case.
Yeah.
And then, well, you said there wouldn't be any Saturday, but I'm going to go and look for some anyway. It's
Yeah.
and what I think God is trying to do for them, in addition to feeding them, is to get them to trust
Mhm.
God.
In verse 18, when they measured it with an omer, he that gathered much had nothing
Yep.
left over,
Yep.
but he that gathered little had no lack.
Mhm.
So he was the selfish one that
Didn't have too much.
had nothing.
I mean, in that instance, God provided enough. No
Mhm.
matter if you thought you had a lot or you had a little, in each case, it was enough for what your needs were.
Okay.
And it was wiped out at the
Hmm.
end of the day.
So it's that question of needs and wants. You know,
Mhm.
what do you want and what do you need?
Right.
Mhm.
And I think God was showing them that he is supplying for their needs.
And I guess you could say that even when they, I don't want to use the word disobeyed, but didn't follow the rules or whatever, still they were provided for the next day.
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm.
like there was no, you know,
All this mercy.
yes,
There were no conditions put on it. He
right.
said what he was going to do, and he kept
Kept
providing
doing
and
it. Right,
providing.
right. And, how often do we test the waters, push the envelope? Do we, do all of those same things, just in different ways, but
And then the requirements of resting on the Sabbath. That
Mhm.
was required.
How often do we think that our lives are infested with worms and stink, and it's because we're trying to rely on yesterday's gifts rather than today's gift?
oh,
Mhm.
that's good. Yeah.
What do you mean? I don't get, I understand.
Well, if they kept hold of yesterday's manna, it turned rotten and started to stink and grew worms. They had to trust that today's manna was going to come. How
I
often do
see.
we do that? We
Mhm.
think that
Right.
our lives are miserable and we don't have what we need because yesterday's stuff is gone. But the promise was never that you'd be able to hold on to this stuff. The promise was, I'll give you more tomorrow.
Yeah.
I'll give you more
Yeah,
than the
what you
next day
need.
and the next day and the next day. And I think this is what Jesus was talking about when he said, give us this day our daily bread.
Mhm.
Our
Yeah.
daily bread, not our weekly
Mhm.
bread, not our monthly bread, our daily bread.
Every day, what wasn't used melted away. So
I just read a story as I was starting to look into this. That I think one of the rabbis, the early rabbis, was talking about this story and said that there were some people who were very diligent and very active, and they ran all over to collecting all this manna, and they got enough. And then there were the people who just kind of reached their hands out of their tents in the morning, and they got enough because God provided no matter what.
Yeah.
yeah.
The lazy people just had to put their hands out, and they got it.
The last paragraph where they talk about let an omer be of it be kept throughout your generations in order that you may see the food with which I fed you in the wilderness. I are there any symbols or things, I wonder, in the Jewish tradition that represent that? Like, and I picture, I don't know if this is what it is, but you know, um, like, did they actually physically do that? Um, you know,
There's some evidence that in the days when they still had the Ark of the Covenant before that
mhm,
was lost,
mhm,
that along with that was a jar of some
uh-huh,
sort. We have no evidence what that might have looked like,
what it was.
but there does seem to be evidence just in writings that
Mhm,
that had existed for a time,
mhm.
and but I
Because
was
in other stories and whatnot, there was the like that remembering, it
Mhm.
was like I picture that,
Yeah.
not that they used it, but as to remind them of,
Yeah.
you know, this story and the origin story of why they were provided for every day.
But yeah, I've never seen what a picture of that jar might have looked like. That would be really neat to see.
It wasn't a chalice, though, was it? A chalice, not rather than a jar?
I-
That's something associate a drinking thing.
Yeah, I
If you mean anything.
I
I
mean,
don't
if
know.
an omer,
I don't
or
know.
did you say an omer was 20 quarts?
Well, an EFO is
Well,
20 quarts.
Oh,
An
yeah.
ohm is 10 quarts.
and mine,
Oh, 2 quarts.
and
Okay.
mine doesn't call it an Omar, calls it a quart.
Yeah.
Okay.
2 quarts per person.
Yeah.
But at the end it says a standard dry measure then in use equaled 20 quarts.
So,
And that's the ephah. Yeah. It only says one omer is 1/10 of an
1/10
ephah.
of an ephah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
that would be
So it's
a,
a half gallon.
a
essentially.
regular sized jar that they would have had.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Mhm.
That for
Mhm.
oil, for other
Yeah.
things, grain.
And I read that. You figured if you had to go out and feed your family on a thin coat
Mhm.
of flaky, that's a lot of time spent
Mhm.
Yes.
to collect that
Yeah,
much.
That's right. All
Yeah.
the time.
It reminds me when you just described that, I immediately pictured my grandmother used to keep an old jar and she'd put all the old bread in it.
Oh.
And when it would get dry, she would grate that for her breadcrumbs.
Oh, there you go.
And, or sometimes
Very good.
she would grate it into that jar and then just keep throwing the old bread in there. But you go down anytime and see her grating old bread into breadcrumbs.
Best kinds of bread.
Mhm,
Fresh bread.
mhm.
I wonder if they tried to do different things with it.
Yeah.
Like you have we have oats. So what do you
Mhm.
try and do with oats? Well, you make oatmeal with it, or you make bread with it, or you make a what do they call it? When you overnight muesli
overnight
with it.
oats. Yeah.
So you mix it with yogurt. So I wonder if they tried to do different things with it to,
Yeah, because
give
40
it
years is
But
a long
a
time.
different, yeah.
I really
I
don't
mean,
know
I
if
think of people today, if they had to wait 40 years eating the same thing every
Yeah.
day.
Oh,
but really they're in the middle of the desert and there was really nothing
Yep.
to,
Yep.
'cause that's what they complained about in the beginning. They should have left us there. At least we had meat and bread. So really, that's probably all they ate for
Well, they
40
did have
years.
quail. They did have quail.
Well, quail at
Quail.
night.
Which was protein.
Which,
yeah.
that's a lot of meat.
So maybe they stuffed it.
Yeah.
They could have maybe one day they mixed it with water, the next day they mixed it with wine.
Well,
Yeah.
it does say in verse 23, bake what you want to bake and boil
Yeah.
what you want to boil. Like, boil it, man. I don't know that.
Yeah.
I guess what bagels are. Bagels are boiled bread. So
Yeah.
That was Rob's dad saying, don't spoil it, boil it.
Mm,
That's working.
mm.
Well, at least the cracker, the wafer tasted like honey. It just
Well,
wasn't a
yeah.
salty
Yeah.
cracker.
Thought it was funny when they said that it was like coriander seed, but it tasted like honey. I'm like, well, coriander doesn't taste anything like honey, but I guess this did.
I always thought of it as breakfast cereal.
Yeah,
Like it's
yeah.
like cornflakes,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I could eat breakfast cereal for 40 years, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a big cereal lover.
I'm not sure I could eat the same cereal for 40 years, though. That might be tough.
Frosted mini wheats, I probably could.
It's like honey wafers. Golden grams. That's what it was. It was golden
Yeah,
grams.
golden grams. There you go.
Life cereal.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's good because it was life. It was
Yeah,
the bread of
yeah.
life for them. Yeah.
Mhm. Well, would we want to read it for a second time? We'll read the shorter version. We'll start at gosh, what was it? 8 to
I don't remember what I suggested.
yeah. I think it was, it's not a lot shorter, but it's shorter. 9 to 18.
9 to 18.
I can read it.
Okay. Start at 9 to 18.
18. Okay. Then Moses said to Aaron, say to the whole congregation of the Israelites, draw near to the Lord, for he has heard your complaining. And as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the Israelites, they looked toward the wilderness, and the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. The Lord spoke to Moses and said, I have heard the complaining of the Israelites. Say to them, at twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall have your fill of bread. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God. In the evening, quails came up and covered the camp. And in the morning, there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the layer of dew lifted, There on the surface of the wilderness was a fine, flaky substance, as fine as frost on the ground. When the Israelites saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, "It is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather as much of it as each of you needs, an omer to a person according to the number of persons, all providing for those in their own tents." The Israelites did so, some gathering more, some less. But when they measured it with an omer, those who gathered much had nothing over, and those who gathered little had no shortage. They gathered as much as each of them needed.
Okay. How does this passage speak to your life now and why?
Hmm.
Well, they didn't have money, so to me, if we apply it now, it seems to imply not only bread, but how we use money, how we think of our lot in life, and how we handle money. Do you give it all away? Do we keep some for our family? How do we disperse it according to what God would want?
What would it mean to have an omer of money?
Or at least to have, I had enough, everybody had enough, you had enough,
Yeah.
just enough for what you needed. And
I
I
think
think,
I was going to say sometimes today when I think someone says I have enough, that doesn't seem like it's a lot to be happy about. Like I have enough, but it's not like, wow, I'm just overwhelmed because I have enough. It's
Mhm,
almost, it's the word enough and scarcity, but somehow enough doesn't sound like a great word to some people.
mhm,
It's the bare minimum.
Mhm.
Right.
yeah,
I can
It's not like
survive, but I'm not happy.
Right.
I would think today more people would say I have plenty.
mhm, yeah,
I think for me, where this is hitting me is a reminder that God has been there in every day of my life so far, every single day. The ones that I felt good, the ones that I did not feel good, the ones that I didn't think I'd make it through, the ones that I didn't want to make it through. The one thing that has always been true is God's been there. And looking back on it, God gave me everything I needed that day. Um, and yet it is still so hard to remember that tomorrow.
yeah,
It's still I relate to these Israelites who tried to hoard and who went out on the Sabbath. It's so hard to trust that it's going to happen again tomorrow. Was 40 years enough to learn that?
yeah.
I don't know. So I can really relate to that.
Well, it reminds me of the other Bible verse. He takes care of the sparrow.
Mm-hmm.
We need
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
to think of
Yep.
how much more.
Yep. Yep.
I think too, what stood out to me more this time reading it through, which I don't know that is, it's not major to the meaning, but that it was Moses telling Aaron, Aaron telling the people. And, of course, we know that about Moses and and Aaron being his speaker from, other stories in the Bible. But how did that affect what the people did or didn't do? Like, do you trust it when it doesn't come straight to you? God wasn't speaking to them. Moses wasn't speaking to them, and how much did that impact what they believed? So relating that to today, I get my news where I get my news from, where I get my information from, you know, am I believing it based on the source? Am I believing it based on who's telling me? gossip versus fact versus, just all of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I don't think it changes the meaning, but I know myself, sometimes I can be like, um, well, they didn't tell me themselves. So, which is good and bad. I'm thinking of two different things in my life. I didn't hear it from the person, so it's not my story to tell. I'm not supposed to know that yet. But then at other times I've been stubborn with that, where I don't need an invitation to help somebody, or I don't need an invitation. Do you know what I mean? Like, and just because somebody didn't tell me doesn't mean I can't help in a certain situation. And so I think sometimes how I process what I'm told to do, I can be stubborn about that. So, like you said, I can see where the Israelites, whether it was out of greed and wanting to hoard the food, but I wonder if some of them were like, well, it's not important enough for Moses to tell us himself, or for God to speak to me myself. So sometimes we're not the most important one in the chain, you know? You know what I'm saying?
No, I wish you'd explain. I don't understand what you're saying.
Sometimes you you're not meant to be the receiver of that information directly. You're not meant to be that person. You're meant to be on the outskirts, and you're just meant to follow, and do what needs to be done. And being
It's very difficult to follow blindly.
yes, yes, yes.
Mhm.
And if you're waiting for a direct invitation, you might be waiting for 40 plus years, So
Is this having to do with the news they're watching on television?
just no, I used the news as one example, but just in everyday life, there's been times when I probably could have helped somebody that I was like, they didn't tell me themselves, so I don't want to reach out and put my nose where it doesn't belong. Well, maybe they needed me to reach out. They needed me to not, I didn't need a direct invitation. I'm trying to be vague so that I don't,
Those are tough situations. I certainly face situations like that as a pastor sometimes too.
right. You don't know
That's tough.
when it's
Yeah.
right to show restraint,
Mhm.
and when it's right to,
Yep.
and maybe I'm just blowing this out of proportion, but that kind of spoke to me, that chain of command. That's what kind of came to my mind when I was reading it, like God to Moses to Aaron to the people.
Mhm.
And, we don't pick where we are in that line. Sometimes God, I feel, speaks directly to me, but sometimes he doesn't. And sometimes I see it in something else that's going on out here. And, that could be I don't need a direct invitation to at least extend a hand. Does that make sense? Sure.
Mhm.
It's okay.
Okay. Yeah. In my head,
Get it later.
in my head,
I don't know what that has to do with the feeding of the manna of the people, but
No, it was more the communication chain.
right.
Mhm.
Moses and Aaron.
Right.
Gotcha.
So you always try and do the right things as God tells us we should do. And I always believe that if I'm doing the right things, I'm helping others, or I'm trying to be the person he wants me to be.
Yeah.
That's when sometimes I'm really surprised when I'll get down to my last few dollars on a project, or something always comes up. And if I struggle for a while, that always tells me that I need to get out and do something for somebody else,
Mhm.
or I'm not doing something I should do because things aren't going well.
Hmm.
And it surprises me, and it's been that way for so long that that's, to me, it's God telling me you're doing well. So I don't want to call it reward, but things go easier for you. You have more of what you need or what you need when you're not living the life you should be living, things get difficult. Yeah. And when things get difficult, then I have to start looking around saying, what haven't I done that I should be doing?
Mhm.
And I'm kind of getting this. That's what God, I think, is trying to teach these people at this point. Trust me, do what I ask of you, and you will have what you need. It's a difficult thing to do, but we always we can never be perfect. We try to be, but we'll never be as perfect as he was. But if you're not making that effort, I always wonder, do you hear criminals and stuff? Well, I can't get a break, and you know, everything happens to me, and change the way you're living.
Mhm.
That's the first thing that comes to mind.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You're never going to get anywhere with the way you're living your life. Move on from that. And you always hear that the more I give, the more you receive. And it's hard to do that too. But it's not all money, it's actions, it's
Mhm.
a lot of things. But I'm kind of getting that in here that this is what God's teaching these people to rely on him, do the right things, because it goes through. Don't take too much. You'll get enough. Everything will work out. Just do what I ask of you, and things will go.
Trust and
And
obey.
part of that is what Georgia was saying, he'll provide you with enough, but there's those people that aren't going to be happy with that,
Right.
and that's part of it, it's the believing and the following blindly, the blind faith on the front end, but then it's also being satisfied with enough
Right.
on the back end of it.
And I mean, even though they saw the results, what he asked them to do exactly is what happened. There'll be enough there, right? So you collect twice on the sixth day and none on the seventh. And, whatever he said, how it was going to go is how it went. So you think about how many times someone can lay something out for you. When you listen to the instructions, it sounds like, okay. But then there's, who is that in the back of the head that says, well, why not? Maybe you should look for some more. Maybe you should try, to something different. And, that I think is being human.
Mhm.
And do we, when we think about, when you look from the beginning and all the way, the different things that God said to Moses and the Moses said to Aaron, to me, it's, whatever he's telling them has come true. So it's a promise.
Mhm.
But how many times when you look at that, do you see, I was looking down at verse number where he was telling about on the seventh day. And God said to Moses, how long are you going to disobey my commands and not follow my instructions? Don't you see that God has given you the Sabbath? So on the sixth day, he gives you bread for 2 days. So each of you stay home. Don't leave home on the seventh day. And then 1630 says, so the people quit working on the seventh day.
Mhm.
So there were some that got it.
Yeah.
But you said the Ten Commandments were later, a little bit
That comes in
later.
chapter 20. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
but
you know.
here he's starting to say, God has these commandments and laws, but apparently I have to spell them out for you.
Yeah.
But
Maybe that's it. Maybe God figured this should be clear to you by now.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't.
what?
And not, I'll give it to
Down so you
Moses.
can remember it.
He can carve it into the tablet, and then the tablet broke, but he
And
did
well,
it
yeah,
again,
because look
right?
what happens when the chain of command
Yeah.
is broken and Aaron starts being in charge. Look what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and spoilers, this is not the last time these people are going to complain on this church.
Yeah. Well, and when you think about it, for 40 years, how many generations came that they had to teach,
Yeah.
this lesson
Yeah.
without, perhaps, we don't know, but without the benefit of the actual act at first, which to me, that's what
Yeah.
I'm saying about that carrying that jar.
Yeah.
I do think for a period of time in my brain that it was a physical reminder,
Yeah.
that they taught each generation about it.
Tradition.
Well, and that'd be a very Jewish thing to do.
Yeah.
Have like,
Oh, yeah.
specific things to
Mhm.
remember.
Mhm.
That's
And they do a lot of that, right? The Jewish people, when they
and
celebrate
Passover is
things like
filled
the
with things like
Passover
that.
and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
everything, there's, so much of it is the remembrance of remembering. They want
Yeah.
you to remember, where you came from. And when you were talking about that, I was just thinking about, when you think about your grandparents talking about World War II, and you talk about the Depression and, going to bed for, days with crackers or whatever it was, but that's something that is in their mind that they will never, ever forget.
Yeah.
And it's hard for us to realize, because I know in my lifetime, I've never experienced anything that, like that. So if you're not in the experience, living through it moment by moment, just hearing the story retold, sometimes it's hard. So, but by the repetition of every year when you have Passover, or every year when you have this, you're going to hear the story.
Mm-hmm.
I've been just watching the Fiddler on the Roof, and the first song is tradition.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's their main thing is tradition.
And that's what I think. Oh, so much of the memory, what they were trying to remember over and over again, is what God has done for us.
Mhm.
It's not remember how good things used to be. It's remember how God saved us from Egypt. Remember how God provided us with food.
Right.
Remember how God did this. Remember how God did this. And
So
I think that's something that we try. I mean, why do we do the church here every single year?
Yeah.
Why do we
Yeah.
come back to church every single week? Why do we need to hear this over
Right.
and over again?
Right.
Because we're as dumb as the Israelites, or exactly as dumb as
Yeah. And
What hasn't
hearing those-
changed in how many years?
no, no. And hearing those stories as a child is different than hearing them as a
Mm.
teenager, is different,
Mm-hmm.
and the same for them,
Yep.
I know, I'm sure all of us, when we taught our kids things that we learned it in a new way, ourselves.
Yep.
So
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned that this would need to be passed on by the generations. It says, when we get to Deuteronomy, that only two people made it who left Egypt and actually made it into the promised land. It was only Joshua and Caleb. They were the only two. Everyone else had been born along the way. Everyone else who left Egypt, including Moses and Aaron, died along the way. And so it was a whole. And this story, it says explicitly, this is, what, a month and a half after they left Egypt. So this is really early on.
Mhm.
So there are only two people who made it to the promised land who remembered this happening. Everyone else was told the story.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Oh, so who would like to read for the third time? We'll read the short version again. Georgia, what uh copy are you using?
I'm reading from the Message. Where do you
Okay.
want me to start? You want me to start at 9 again? I can do that.
Yes. That would be great if you would like to do that. Thank you.
Moses instructed Aaron, tell the whole company of Israel, come near to God. He's heard your complaints. When Aaron gave out the instructions to the whole company of Israel, they turned to face the wilderness, and there it was, the glory of God visible in the cloud. God spoke to Moses, I've listened to the complaints of the Israelites. Now tell them, at dusk you will eat meat, and at dawn you will have your fill of bread, and you'll realize that I am God, your God. That evening, quail flew in and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew all over the camp. When the layer of dew had lifted, there in the wilderness ground was fine, flaky, something fine like frost on the ground. The Israelites took one look and said to one another, Manhu, what is it? They had no idea what it was. So Moses told them, it's the bread God has given you to eat. And these are God's instructions. Gather enough for each person, about 2 quarts per person. Gather enough for everyone in your tent. The people of Israel went to work and started gathering, some more, some less. But when they measured out what they had gathered, those who gathered more had no extra, and those who gathered less weren't short. Each person had gathered as much as was needed. Moses said to them, "Don't leave any of it until the morning."
Thank you.
Mhm.
What might God be calling you to do or change this week through this message?
I think for me is remember back my life, and which seems pretty grim, but finding when God was there for me and what God did for me. I guess like he bidding them to do is remembering what God did throughout my life and being thankful for that.
And say, I've been on a good roll lately with earnings on the side and things that have been going well for me. So I can't hoard that. So I need to pass some of that along so that the next person have the same experience. Helping out some others.
I think for me, it's that just letting go and knowing that it will all work out. Like it will be there tomorrow, just enough will be provided and it will work out.
I am so good about getting worried about the next day. I'm so good at that. Like that's a superpower I have.
The next month, the next 3
Yep,
months.
I've heard.
Yeah.
I've heard somebody call it future tripping, and I'm good at it. And that's what I hear is that yeah, look back on your past to remember where God was, and also look forward to your future, trusting that God's going to be there just as much. And that's
It's even tomorrow.
even tomorrow. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And that if I don't know now what I'm supposed to do tomorrow, good, because if I knew now, it would just get rotten and stink overnight. So
Yeah, I mean, think about that. You think about how much you labor over something and think over it and think over it, and then it's just like it just becomes foul. It just becomes
Yeah.
something that you don't want to do, or
Yeah.
that it's like it becomes a chore when it should be something that you enjoy doing.
Some left part of it till the morning. In other words, kept worrying about it until the morning, like 3 a.m. is my time to start worrying. And then it breeds worms. And even Paul says, don't do that.
Yeah, don't do it. And if you see something that breeds worm that has bread worms and stinks, throw it out. Just throw it out
Yeah.
and look for today's manna because it's out there.
That's the shake the dust off the tube.
There's a note in the margin of my Bible here that says that the Jewish philosopher Philo said that the giving of manna is the way all God's gifts are given. They are always fresh.
Mm.
And that's interesting,
That's
God's gifts are always fresh.
like a fresh bit of greens.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking, for me, it was thinking about, this is, the symbolism of bread and food and feeding us, that those are simple things that we just take for granted that we're going to eat every day or that we do that, but thinking more of them as a blessing, that God, that He is blessing us with these things that are simple so that maybe we should be able to go out and do more because we're already taken care of. Do we have the ability to help take care of others because He's already taken care of us?
I hear about so many people are being killed and all throughout the world and how can I best help? And I guess this is the first start is is to work on my own life,
Mhm.
and then it will spread out, I suppose, there.
9 times out of 10, when you worry yourself to death about something, it comes out just fine anyway. It's never as bad as you think it's going to be.
You know, I just saw something on Facebook that said exactly that. It said 9 out of 10 times when I worry a lot about something, it works out fine. So worry must be working.
Oh God.
Just-
That's not the
think-
message.
Just think of the time and the energy that you on
Mhm.
something, that you worry so much about, the time and the energy that's spent on it. And then when it's over and you think, wow, where could I have used that time,
Yeah.
to help somebody else or to advance, God's
And-
kingdom or
And
whatever.
even if the thing you were worried about did go badly and it was a challenge, and what did it help though to be worried about it for so long? How did that help you in that
Yep.
moment? It probably didn't. Yeah.
Well, it draws me to Christ's presence. So I say,
Mm.
God, will you be right close to me tonight?
Mhm.
And then you help me with these worries. I want to give them to
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
If I actually give them, I can see me giving the worries and things to him, and he takes them.
Mhm.
See, that's my wife and I are always back and forth. She's that way. She has to worry about everything way in advance. And what are you going to do? And what about this? And it's like, my response is usually, I'll worry about it when I get to that point.
Yep.
Right now, I got to do this. When I get there, I'll figure out what to do at that point. But she has to have everything calculated.
And planning is important. It's just worrying, isn't it? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Right,
And
right.
there's a fine line between the two.
Mhm.
There's a
Yeah.
very fine line. Yeah.
Yeah.
It really this story really sounds like good news to me right now. It really it feels like a good,
Yeah.
Mhm.
really a just a story of goodness.
Very rich.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see how this all reflects on uh, the new
Campaign.
Stewardship
Campaign,
campaign?
yeah.
Yeah, me too. Um,
Well, we've been working on it for months, and I think Pastor would agree. I think we have some neat things to help
Oh,
people
yeah.
think about it.
yeah, there's gonna be at least one really surprising thing that happens on Sunday with that. Yeah. Yeah.
It might. What was the cereal that you said, Justine? If it was honey
Oh,
smacks,
for me, frosted mini wheats.
oh, frosted mini wheats.
That's my
I love the bottom of the box where all the shredded bits, just pour it all.
Did anybody? Do you ever
Did you
remember?
guys
It wasn't frosted, but they used to come shredded wheat, and it was like in a biscuit. It was about
Oh,
this
yes.
big.
yeah. Mhm.
Anybody's grandparents used to put hot water on it first and make it soft.
Yes. My coffee.
Warm.
Oh, that sounds all right.
My
Yeah.
grandfather put coffee on his. He
Oh, really?
My grandmother would do warm milk and sugar.
Mhm.
Oh, well,
Yeah,
that's
my
frosted
grandmother
mini
would-
wheats, especially.
Yeah.
Would do the hot water
They
and
still
then
sell
pour
it
the
in the
hot water
biscuit
off.
form?
Yeah. I'm
I
like
haven't seen that.
I've been an old person at heart my whole life. I love shredded wheat and
Cream of wheat.
bran and all that stuff. They're like frosted shredded wheat is like my only sugar cereal that I really eat.
And the farina and
Oh, I love
wheat.
Oh yeah,
cream
farina.
of wheat. Mhm. Yeah, I love farina.
Now, do you eat farina with sugar and milk, or do you eat it with butter?
Sugar and milk.
Sugar milk.
Yeah.
I could butter, but
Yeah, I could. We used to do butter when I worked at the nursing home, we would always put a lot of butter in it because it was extra fat for them.
Yeah.
That's how they ate it,
Mhm.
Now pastina, that's butter. If I have
Definitely.
pastina.
this is right after Moses had his wonderful song that he praised God and he told
Yep.
who God is, how beautiful you are. Thy right hand, you're glorious in power. So he lifted God up then, and then came this
Yep,
story.
that's what happens. And I mean that's I think in a lot of ways that's the story of the Israelites is
Mhm.
praising God complaining to
Yeah.
God, praising God, complaining to God. It's just like, and
Yeah.
is that really not us? You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Things don't change very much.
no, not that anyway.
Thousands of
Yeah,
years.
no. Yeah, technology
Thank God,
changed.
thank God, God doesn't give up. That's all
Amen.
I have to
Amen.
say.
He's still trying to
Right?
teach us.
Amen.
We're a
Some
sorry
of
lot.
us get it, some of us don't, right?
Yeah. And those of us who get it only sometimes get it,
Yeah.
honestly.
Mhm.
Flash in the pan.
I get it sometimes.
Mhm.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
I preach about it more frequently than I get it.
Uh, well, that was nice, interesting conversation
Yeah,
tonight. Thank you.
Mhm.
All right.
Would anybody like to have a prayer to finish?
No, that's it.
Mhm.
Yeah, you can. You can.
Oh Lord, we do lift you up and thank you and praise you. And help us keep praising you every day and every minute of the day because you deserve it. You are our Savior. And so we thank you for this message in the Word and all these wonderful thoughts and cruisings and what you've taught us tonight. Keep us safe and our families. Bless our families. In your precious name we pray.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for joining us,
Thanks.
Georgia.
Yeah. I'm glad it worked out for
Come
sure.
back again next week.
I'll try and plan on it. All right, everybody. Good
All right, good
night.
night.
Bye.